Welcome back everyone to another Unreal Engine 4 video, and in today's video we shall create a preview of character inside of our inventory widget, so we can equip our equipment pieces and see them getting added to our preview of character. So let's begin working on this. So first, let's begin by creating ourselves a material that we are actually going to be displaying in our inventory widget, which is going to contain our displayable character. So in my inventory folder, as you may notice, I moved my structures over here. So here I will create a new material, and I'm going to call this, let's simply call this render target matte. For instance, now let's select the base node and let's change the material domain from surface to the user interface. Also, let's change the blend mode from opaque to translucent, which now gives us the opacity value. Now inside of here, let's right click and let's look for a texture sample. So let's add a texture sample. Let's connect our RGB to the final color, and from the alpha, let's do a 1-. So 1- and connect this value into our opacity. And this 1- will allow us to remove the background of our image. Now from the texture, let's drag from it and let's look for a texture parameter, texture object parameter. And let's make sure we rename this to something. So parameter name, I'm gonna type in the render texture, and we shall need this name later on. So I'm gonna leave this material open for now so that I can copy and paste this exact name. Now, but with this, we are done with the material as of right now. The next thing that we need is the actual actor that we shall spawn in the game world, which will contain our character's preview. So let's right click, and I'm going to simply create a regular actor. Since we do not want to replicate this, we want to store one single instance on the local machine instead of having this run on the server. So let's call this equipment preview of actor. Let's open this up, and inside of here we need quite a few things. First and foremost, we need the skeletal mesh. So let's call this mesh. So this is going to be the mesh that is going to contain our character. And then we need a static mesh for every single one of our equipment pieces. So I have an armor mesh, then I have a arm 1 mesh, arm 2 mesh, and I have 3 meshes for my weapons. So weapon 1 mesh. Let's make 2 more, and this is gonna be my weapon 2 mesh, and I'm gonna make the back slot weapon to be called weapon 3 mesh. So that's all that I have for my system as of right now. Later on, probably I should add more once I have more equipment pieces on my character. And the last component that we need to look for is the scene capture component 2D. There we go. We have this set up. Now for the testing purposes, probably I would suggest selecting the skeletal mesh and actually creating the skeletal mesh itself. As you can see, by default this guy is a little bit sideways, so what you want to do is rotate this guy towards the camera. Then you want to select the camera and move it out a little bit so that this guy would actually be in the frame. So for now, let's just simply move it up here, and probably we will need to adjust this later on. Now I'm going to remove the skeletal mesh because we need it to be empty. And now let's start creating some functions in here. First, let's create a new function, and let's call this set mesh locations. Since we want to set the locations for every single one of our meshes. For this one, let's have an input, and this input, let's simply call this array, and this needs to be our S equipment structure, and let's make this into an array. Then what we can do is simply loop through this array. There we go. So we are looping through that. Then on the array index, we want to do a switch on integer, and basically what we have is 6 equipment pieces. So let's add 6 entries to this, so 0 till 5, just like we have in the array itself. And then from over here we need to set our sockets. So I'm gonna go to my third-person character because I already have those in my equipment visuals function. There we go, there it is. We could have actually copied this as well. So I'm gonna copy all of these, and I'm gonna actually copy the switch as well, and simply paste that in here, remove this switch and replace it with this one. There we go, since this already has the execution pins connected. And what we want to do is simply right click on any of these and promote this to a local socket name. So now this is stored locally in this function as well. Now the next thing that we need is actually another local variable. So let's create a local variable and let's call this local mesh, and this needs to be the static mesh component. So make sure it is a component. Then once we have done that, on every single one of these executions, we want to set this local mesh. So make sure you set one up. So I'm just going to simply copy these. There we go. So I have my local meshes, and then on every single one of these, I want to connect them to my actual components. So for the armor, let's use the armor mesh. There we go. One over here. Then let's use our arm1, where we have our arm1, arm2, and so forth. There we go. Now the next thing that we want to do is let's drag from one of the executions and let's attach. Attach to component. We need the attach component to the component, not the actor. We want to attach a component to a component. Let's connect all the execution pins. Now the target that we want to attach to something is our local mesh. Here we go. So we have that component, and the parent is our skeletal mesh. So let's make sure to connect that one as well. And the socket name, of course, is our local socket name. Then on all of these locations, rules, then let's set snap to target for the location, rotation, and the scale. And we are good with this function. So this is going to be the base function, which is going to be run only once to set up our actual sockets for this specific mesh and to connect the static components to this specific mesh. Now we need another function which is actually going to set the meshes themselves. So let's call this set equipment mesh. And inside of here, we're going to need first let's call this item, and this needs to be the data table row handle, and this needs to be a single variable, and also we need the index, which is an integer. Then what we can do is break this, split these pins, and we can get the data table row. So let's get the row. Then we need to get our S inventory structure over here. So in my third-person character, in add item to equipment, I know there is one. There it is. Let's copy that one over here. There we go. So we've set this one up. And what we want to do is add a local variable, and let's call this local mesh. But instead of being a component, we simply want it to be a static mesh, like so. Then on the row found, we can set this local mesh to be equal to the mesh from this structure. So we've saved the mesh for this specific item. And then again, we can create a switch on integer. So based on our index, let's create 6 entries to this. There we go, 0 till 5, and the selection is the index from the inputs. Now over here, from every single one of our execution pins from the switch, we want to set the static mesh. So let's run a set static mesh, let's say for the armor first. There we go, so we have one for the armor already. Then let's copy our set static mesh nodes a couple of times, since we need 6 of those. Let's bring in 6, then let's connect all of our execution pins. Then once we have done that, let's connect our actual meshes. So the first one, 0 index, is the armor. Then index 1 is my arm1. Then I have my arm2, and etc. And then for the new mesh, what we want to do is bring in our local mesh that we set right here. And we want to connect this to be the new mesh. So let's connect those. There we go. So now we have set up our set equipment mesh function. So now we are only left with one, which you might already know the name. This is going to be the remove equipment mesh, and this is simply going to reset the mesh back to 0. And what we can simply do is from set equipment mesh, we can copy the last part, this one right here, from the switch. Let's copy that. Let's copy that in here. Let's connect the execution. Let's drag from our selection into the function node, which creates ourselves an input. And the only thing that we need to do is simply delete this local mesh. And now this is going to reset the static mesh to be none. Now just about everything has been set up. We are done, pretty much done with this actor. Now we need a variable inside of our third person character. So let's go there and let's create a new variable. And I'm gonna call this render target material. Let's see, this was the dynamic material instance dynamic. Now we can compile and save this, go back to our preview actor, and let's go to the event graph. Now let's delete all of these, and on begin play, what we want to do is cast to the third person character, well, in my case the third person character. And since I'm going to pass along the owner, then for the object reference we can simply get the owner. So let's get the owner of this guy right here. Then we want to create the render, let's see, create render target 2D. There we go. We have some width and some height. You might want to adjust these a little bit, so we're going to do that, but we're going to do that a little bit later on. Now we can drag in our scene capture component, and from this scene capture component we want to set the texture target to be this render target right here. So use the return value for this one. Then we can create the material, so create dynamic material instance, and the parent for this one is the material we created, so our render target material. So let's look for that one, render target material, and now we need to provide this a name. We need a unique name. If you have a proper game, you probably have some kind of lobby system or whatever. If this is a multiplayer game, so you have a unique character ID or you have a unique name for every single one of your players, so you probably want to use that. I don't have this system yet. We shall create it probably in the future, so we will come back and fix this issue, because we need to have a unique material name, otherwise we are overwriting this and we are seeing other people's equipment. So what I'm gonna do is right click, append, string append, and over here we can connect this to be our optional name. Now for the top part, I'm gonna drag from my third person character, and this is going to create us get display node, and this simply will return the text of third person character, but every single one of our characters is called third person character, so we need some unique identification. Small cheat, let's create a random integer. So random integer, and the max value, well, the higher you go, the smaller the chances are you're gonna have two of the same numbers. So I'm gonna type in, with the 1000 it worked fine. Let's be safe, let's type in 10,000 and let's connect it right here. Like I said, if you have a unique identification inside of your third person character, use that one instead of this integer. Now the next thing that we want to do is, as this third person character, we want to set our render target material, the variable that we just created in our third person character, and this needs to be our newly created dynamic material. Now from our material, let's drag from this, and what we want to do is set the texture parameter value. Let's connect the execution, and the value is going to be our canvas texture. So let's drag from our texture target into the value right here, and for the parameter name, so we are providing our material with a texture, and now in our material we need to tell in which location we need to input this texture. So let's go to our material, and like I said, we need to remember this name right here. So render texture, as you can see, is the parameter name, so let's copy that one inside of here, and now we are going to print a texture in here, and the texture is going to come from our scene capture component camera. And that is all that we need to do in this actor right here. Now let's go to our third person character and actually spawn this guy. So what we want to do is, let's create a custom event. So custom event, and let's call this spawn equipment preview. There we go, spawn equipment preview. Now from this one we want to create a actor from class, spawn actor from class, and we want to spawn our preview. So equipment preview actor. For the transform, let's make a transform, and what we want to do is move our preview outside of the game world. So we want to have it far away so that we can remove the background. Once we are outside in the outer space, we can have a transparent background. If we spawn this in the game world, we shall see a background for that specific location. But since we don't want to do that, let's simply type in the X. Let's type in something like 10 million, and I believe it begins somewhere from around 10 million begins the space. So with 10 million we should be good. Now we want to expand this and we want to provide the owner. The owner of course is going to be self, so this specific third person character, and then we can promote this actor to a variable, and let's call this our preview actor. Now from our preview actor we want to get our mesh. So probably at the very bottom. So we want to get the mesh. At the very bottom is our mesh, so our skeletal mesh, and we want to set the skeletal mesh, connect the execution, and for the new mesh we want to drag in our mesh currently that we have right here, and we want to get its skeletal mesh and connect it to the new mesh like so. Then from our mesh we need to get the anim class, so the animation class blueprint, and then as the preview actors mesh we can set anim instant class, and we can use our animation class so that we would provide our preview with the same animations that we have. Then the next thing that I want to do is bring in, again, let's bring in the preview actor, and from this guy right here we want to set our mesh locations so that we would attach the equipment pieces to the specific sockets, and for the array we want to use our equipment visuals array like so. So now we are good with the spawn event. Now let's actually run this event, and we want to run it on the begin play. So if we would at the end of it we can spawn the preview, spawn equipment preview, but the issue with this is the begin play event, which I actually found out very recently, is getting ran replicated. So if we join with 3 characters, it will be ran 3 times. We don't want to do that. So what we can do is bring this back a little bit, and before we actually do something on begin play, we can do a if branch check. And the condition, so we shall continue on true route only, false, let's leave it empty. But on the condition, we need a node called is locally controlled. Is locally controlled. So if this is the local environment of this specific character, then we can run these events. But if this is getting ran from, let's say, like the server side, nothing is going to get ran, and that's exactly what we want on our begin play. Now we need to actually update our mesh with the equipment pieces. So we need to actually use our set and remove equipment mesh functions. So in our third person character, on add item to equipment, let's look for a location. So let's see, we shall probably move this bottom switch, bottom if branch check down a little bit, because once we add the equipment visuals, we also want to add the visuals to our preview. So let's drag in our preview actor, and right after the server add equipment visuals, we want to set the equipment mesh. So let's move this in between these nodes right here, and let's see. So the item probably will be this item right here, and the index is going to be our local index, so we can connect it like so. So our local item data table and the local index. Now let's go to our remove amount at index, so where we are removing the equipment. So as you can see, Here is the function which actually allows us to remove the items, the visual part of them at least. Let's bring our set node back a little bit, and after remove extra slots, let's again drag in our preview actor, and from this guy right here we can remove the equipment mesh, and this only needs the index. So let's get our local index from over here. There we go. So we have an index for the selection. Now everything is supposed to work just fine. All we gotta do is simply display this on screen. So I'm gonna go to my UI, in my UI inventory, and for now, just for testing purposes only, I'm simply gonna add an image in the middle of the screen. I will modify this outside of this video, so I wouldn't waste your time. I will probably design this somewhere in the equipment slots, but for now we have an image. What we want to do is in the brush we want to change the tint to no opacity, so just in case something goes wrong we don't see nothing in here, so it's not just a white square. And for the brush we actually want to create a binding. Now for the return value, let's make the slate brush, and we need to populate our image. So let's get a reference to our player, which I see we do not have. So let's promote, we are casting over here, let's promote this to a variable, let's call this player. So we have a reference to our character. So on event construct, let's get a reference, and in our brush binding, let's get our player, and let's simply get our render target material. So let's get and move this into the image. So now we are populating our image with a material. That means that now if we go to the game and press play, see, let's press I, there is our character. It's quite small, so you might have to adjust the camera like I said, but if we would pick some things up, let's try picking up some weapons, press I, let's drag this on top of this, let's have a weapon, let's have another weapon, let's have another weapon, let's perhaps remove a weapon, and as you can see we have our guy right here. So for some reason when I try to play this I'm getting an error that the accessed none trying to read the property player, which I seem to find very odd, since on the event construct we are instantly creating a reference to our player, but it doesn't seem to work. So I'm going to remove that, and I'm actually going to delete the variable itself as well. Yes, I know it's in use. What I'm going to do is copy the cast to node into the get brush. So let's cast to our character, and then as this character we can get this material instance. So now the error should be gone if you were getting one. I were, so I'm gonna change that, and also in the designer make sure that you anchor your image to the middle. And like I said, my character was way too small, so I'm simply just going to move the camera in on him to make him bigger, and now you can see this guy is getting way bigger. Also, if your image is a little bit, you see that the preview character is in a very bad quality, what you want to do is up the width and height of this image right here. So I'm going to do something like 1024 in the width and height, and now you can see the character is way smoother and it's not as pixelated. So that's going to be it for today's video. If you enjoyed my content, make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Join my Discord, support me on Patreon. Check out my website, itsmebro.net, because there is quite a few assets already, and I see you in the next episode.